Hey guys, welcome to another bonus pod of the ESPN Footy Podcast. My name is Matt Walsh. I'm joined, as always, by Jake Michaels. Jake, another strange circumstance we find ourselves in discussing another coach sacking.
Yes, it feels like yesterday we were talking about Nathan Buckley, but we've got another one today. So it's all happening in the footy world at the moment. And because we lost that bye week, which I'm going to keep going on about, we don't have much time to react to it.
No, it's been a pretty chock-a-block week, and we thank Rohan Connolly for joining us on this podcast. He also joined us on that Nathan Buckley one. Rohan, David Teague, he's been moved on, probably the worst-kept secret and in footy, and whether you agree or you disagree, you could probably see it coming. Was it the right call?
Oh, look, I don't think it was. I accept there are valid arguments about their frailties defensively and whatever, but I can't get past the fact that, he's coached 50 games. It's basically a period of time spanning half a season, one compromised season. So that's brought its own complications for him as coach and bedding down his systems and methodology. Methodology. I shouldn't have tried that word. And I think he's made them a significantly more positive team. They can kick scores now, which they were chronically unable to do. Now, notwithstanding the weaknesses, I think, you can't get past this. I think there's been so many impositions on him. He hasn't been given a particularly experienced support crew. He's been ritually shown little support from the administration or from those notorious sort of power brokers outside the club. He's had all these obstacles. And to be honest, and I know Jake's on the same page with me as this one, I think that they're about where they should be. I don't think they are a drastically underperformed list who have been undercoached. I think they're about where they should be. I think there are holes in that list that need to be rectified. And I feel like he'd done enough under all those circumstances to warrant at least one more season and see out the contract they rewarded him with. The last point I'd make on this one is I thought he was good enough to go from interim coach to permanent coach a little over 2 years ago. So if the same people now think he's not, how much confidence can you have in them to have made the right decision this time?
Yeah, you did write about this on espn.com.au/AFL earlier in the season about how the expectation around Carlton probably wasn't to be finals this year. There was probably a little bit of expectation from fans. But when you sort of take a step back and look at the club as a whole, it probably wasn't the year for that. Having said that, they've gone backwards this year. So it was a 7-win season last season in a as you say, a shortened season and with shortened quarters, an 8-win season this year. But crucially, they've dropped from 11th to 13th, Jake. And look, it doesn't take a lot for clubs to part ways with their coach these days, especially if you're Carlton.
Yeah, it's another change. I think, what is it now? It's about eight different coaches since in the last 2 decades. So it's quite, and maybe 5 in the last 9 years or something.
More
like
coaches
that
than Australia's had prime ministers, I think, which is a tough thing to do.
But yeah, look, I've been big on this. Carlton was never, ever, ever, ever in contention to play finals this year. I was stunned. One of our colleagues, he said to me, the Blues will finish top 4 this year. I nearly fell off my chair. The talent is just not there. And the thing is, you can blame David Teague all you want. And Rohan makes a good point. Like, the majority of his tenure as head coach of Carlton has been significantly compromised. We can talk about last year, but let's be honest, this year as well. So for him to only really have 2 full seasons in charge, yeah, it might be a little bit harsh. I think the thing that I found strange was the timing of it, given the news of yesterday, Wednesday, that Alastair Clarkson is not going to coach next year, or at least that's what the report is. Alastair Clarkson won't be coaching next year. So the fact that Carlton's moved on from David Teague tells me that Clarko won't coach the Blues in the next 3 to 5 years, because who's going to then come in to coach 1 year for Clarko to come in the year after?
Well, we speculated about this on Tuesday's podcast, saying that the wins almost had changed a little bit. The way the narrative had shifted around Teague to, well, he's a dead man walking, to, well, geez, he's been treated really unfairly by Carlton's power brokers, as you say, Rohan, and the board. And there's a new incoming president who might want to save face and say, all right, we'll give him another season just to see where he's at and see out that deal. But obviously that hasn't transpired that way. The the external review into the club and the football department has obviously recommended that Teague be moved on. And I know that you guys are both on the same page in that he probably shouldn't have, or should have been afforded another season. But there's some pretty damning things this year. And the issues that Carlton had this year are the same issues that they had last year. And it's the same issues that they had when he first took over as an interim coach. And it's just being exposed defensively, being exposed on transition, and just not being able to stop runs of play and runs of goals.
This isn't just the last couple of years. Like, and I know, look, our listeners would know that we're both Carlton supporters. And I say this, I genuinely say this. Carlton's been it's not a light bulb moment, but Carlton's been a shambles for 2 decades now. It's embarrassing when you look at some of the numbers of the last 2 decades, but yet the Blues still make out that they're this massive power club that everyone wants to come to. Well, I'm sorry, but then you're not anymore. And I'm saying this as a Carlton supporter.
And that, Jake, is the issue for me. And it's a much harder one to deal with because a lot of it, it can't be nailed down to black and white things. It's about a culture and about an atmosphere that pervades the club. But they have found it really hard to throw off the shackles of their historical reputation. And it reflects itself time and time again. And now, you've had a couple of administrations which have tried very resolutely to affect that cultural change. And they're always, in the end, trumped by the power and influence of big-moneyed and well-known people around that club. And it's a huge issue. It's not only an issue for them, it's an issue for clubs like Essendon and Collingwood as well.
I understand. But you can't or correlation doesn't mean causation all the time. Just because Carlton's had a recent history of turning over coaches and jumping at shadows and all that doesn't mean that this wasn't a good decision, I think, because it's the first time that the club's gone through an external review and have brought in, outsiders to look inside and interview people at the club and try and get a grasp of what's going on, which I think was a big thing for a club as, well, proud's probably not the word, but as steadfast as the Blues has been. But they gave up 100 points 9 times this season. 3 times they gave up 94 or more points. That's more than half of the games they played this year. They gave up 94 or more points in a year where, we've just discussed this on the main podcast with Christian from Champion Data. Scoring's at all-time lows. They gave up 19 straight against Port Adelaide. They've given up 5-goal swings more than anyone can keep track of, and they haven't been able to stop that in the 2.5 years.
Can I just present a counter to that?
Of course.
And that is an absolutely understandable point of view. But I would also argue this, that, of course, you don't not make a decision now because of history. However, 2 obvious cases here, Richmond and Geelong. Geelong at the end of 2006, when they could have moved Bomber Thompson on, but they stuck by him, got the right people in place around him. Look what happened. And Richmond at the end of 2016, when they'd lost, 3 elimination finals. 3 elimination finals in a row, had a shocker in 2016. They could have sacked Hardwick. Instead, there was a period of reflection. Yep. Got a few people in place, brought in Neil Baum. Look what happened there. Now, I've absolutely no doubt in the world that if both those situations were replicated at Carlton, both those coaches would have been sacked.
Yep.
So why do we sort of discount the possibility that Teague can be given equal amount of support and those deficiencies remedied rather than shake the whole place up from top to bottom and effectively start yet again?
Jake, I'll put this to you then. If an external review comes to a conclusion that he's not the right man for the job and that other people at the club are not the right person for the job, would it be better for Carlton to say, actually, don't worry about it, we're going to stick with our guns? Or would it be better for them to embrace that report and say, okay, well, we're going to try and start again? I mean, you're mad either way, aren't you?
Well, if the review comes out and says that David Teague's not the right man for the job, then all of a sudden you can definitely make that case. And I'm on the fence with this because I can see it both ways, that he should be gone and he should stay. But if the review says he should go, he's only been there 2 years. So what does that say about the people that made the decision in the first place? That's a problem in itself. It's not like he's been there 9 years and they had a bit of success and he's fallen away. And it's like, okay, it's time to get a fresh face in there. He's been there 2 seasons. And surely, if you can't get that right, the question, and it's not just one coaching change. We mentioned this at the start of this episode. Like, we've had 5 different coaches in the last 9 years. So the people making the decisions are consistently getting it wrong.
And changes of philosophy, Jake. So they've gone from pagan and authoritarian to Britain, relatively anonymous teaching coach. Then you go to,
Ratton.
Yeah, I did it the wrong way. Ratton, a favourite son. And then you go for an authoritarian Malthouse. Then you go for a teaching coach. And then you've gone effectively with Teague. They've gone with people power because, this guy wouldn't have been the first choice for the job, but did such a good job at it. And the changes seem to be so dramatic that how could they not appoint him? And that's always the problem with interim coaches. But that complete knee-jerk change of philosophy now, that indicates a group of decision makers that aren't actually convinced themselves in their own direction.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think given what Carlton embarked upon nearly 6 years ago now, where they said they'd strip it right back, strip the list back, strip everything back, it's now been 6 years of heartache for fans. And the AFL community has sort of watched this team just sort of bumble along where it's been, bottom of the ladder, up to about 12th or so. And it looks like it's not working. So you can just sort of see, you're right, there's this knee-jerk reaction of, well, something needs to change now because we've done all this hard work of investing in youth like, Jacob Wiedering, who's one of the best defenders in the league. You got Harry Mackay, who just won the Coleman medal. Charlie Curnow, when he's fit, one of the most dynamic players. You got Walsh, you got Cripps, you got all these sorts of, you've got the pieces there, but it's just, they just haven't been able to convert it into a solid list and a list that's able to contend at the right time of the year.
If the AFL Aussie rules was 5-a-side, Carlton would be just one of the best teams in the comp. But the problem is it's not. You need 17 other players. And the thing is, this is the big problem for the Blues. Like, you named 5 A graders. No one would deny that those 5 players are A graders. But how many B graders are on Carlton's list? I can only think of one, and that's Adam Sard, who was a good player at the Bombers. And look, it's no disrespect to be a B grade player. There's a lot of good B grade players running around. But
who would you say is a B grader elsewhere, for context?
I think the first name that popped into my head when we discussed it earlier was Sam Menegola. Good player.
I've heard of Sam Menengola.
Yes, Menengola. But a good, consistent player that you know what you're going to get each week. He's not a Patrick Dangerfield, but he can win you games. He'll have games that he plays fantastic. He'll pick up his touches. He can do a bit of everything. You know what you're going to get. And that's what Sard is. He's a very honest player that you know what you're going to get. The problem with the Blues is you have that top line 4 or 5 A graders. You have no one in that next bracket. And then you look at the list, and a word that Rohan uses that I love is plotters. Carlton's got 12 guys that run around each week that you think, gee, they're just not that good. And what I always have said about, I've never been one that's big on coaching. A coach is only as good as the players at their disposal. The biggest issue I've had with Carlton over the last 10 years has been recruitment. We've got 6. I said we've. I shouldn't have said we've. Carlton has 16 players on its list right now that have played at least one game at another club. So I'll just quickly go through the list. Williams, Kennedy, Fogarty, McGovern, Jones, Doherty, Betts, Plowman, Martin, Marchbank, Newman, Pitnet, Nunes, McDonald, Sard, and Setterfield. Now, that's 16 players. I would say only 3 of those 16 are better at Carlton than they were at their other club. And that's Jones, Doherty, and Setterfield. Now, Setterfield only barely played at the Giants, so you can almost say he's never really played anywhere else. Doherty and Jones have both been at Carlton for a long time, and Jones has obviously done a fantastic job of resurrecting his career as a defender. And Doherty came to the Blues young and has been a good player, but he looks like he's getting towards the end of his now. My problem is with all these other players that are either, the majority of them are worse than what they were at their previous clubs, and the hype around players like Jack Martin and Mitch McGovern and Zach Williams, as if we were getting in these A-plus graded players. They're just not that good. And Carlton's continue to hype them up and pay overs for them. And the recruitment's been poor. I don't think there's a club that you could look at that kind of a list and say the players that they've brought in have consistently been C grade and lower, particularly when you're giving up so much for them.
I've got to say, at the risk of introducing my own club to the conversation, there are so many parallels between Carlton and Essendon. It's not funny, but one I keep thinking of just this morning is the fact that Carlton brought in Sard and Williams, And I think back to Essendon bringing in Shield and Smith.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that is sort of testimony to Carlton perhaps thinking they were more advanced as a group than they were. And it's interesting. What is the bottom line of Essendon having turned the situation around? Well, they've gone with kids. The kids have been good. They've added something. And Shield and Smith have really become almost peripheral players in that side.
Yeah.
And
the other thing is they have brought in some top-line players in Stringer and Hind. Who else have they brought in from other clubs? I mean, there are players there that have come in from other clubs that are in their best sort of 10 players now.
Well, I guess I'm trying to sort of offer a ray of hope to you two before you top yourselves.
Oh, there's no hope.
that if they nail the draft, if they go heavily at the draft, nail the draft picks. But the development is a really good point, because I would say Essendon, again, until the emergence of Perkins, Jones, Cox, hadn't had a top kid who'd been developed sufficiently for, again, almost 2 decades. So development is critical.
Yeah, and without, wanting to trot out the perennial line as well, but the kids that Carlton have played, funnily enough, in the last month of the year, when it was, everything was all over for the Blues in terms of playing finals, but we've seen Stocker all year. I think Stocker's got lots to offer. We saw Brody Kemp, who was their first-round draft pick from a couple of years back, who missed the first year with an ACL, and he's looked okay.
I think Owies is a good find.
Owies is a good find. Josh Honey's a good find.
Yep.
We saw Corey Durden really, really late in the piece, and maybe there's something to work with there. David Cunningham, a decent role player, has been injured with an ACL. Charlie Curnow came back for a couple of games. So there is light there as well, but it's all about how these players develop, because there's a sort of a lack of these 22 to 24-year-olds that are going to help carry this team over the next couple of years. Well, I guess we should move on to who the front runner for the job is, because it would have to be Ross Lyon, wouldn't it, Jake?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, as I said before, the timing I found quite strange, given, as I said, Clarko's news. So that almost rules him out completely. So it surprised me a bit. When I heard that, I kind of thought, well, it's probably guaranteed Teague another year. Obviously not. So I think, Ross Lyon probably does loom as the favourite in the race. And I wouldn't be surprised if he got the job, because aside from Malthouse, Carlton hasn't really gone for a senior coach in its last, an experienced coach in its last sort of 6 or 7.
Rohan, one of Carlton's big off-field programs is Carlton Respects, which is a gender equality thing. You're a social commentator as well as a football commentator, but given the way that Lyon exited Freo, could this be a little bit controversial if they do go down this path?
I think it's shaping that way. I mean, I'm just going on the reactions I've seen from various Carlton people, and there's no doubt the club has invested very heavily and sincerely in those aims. And there's no doubt I've seen some real strong misgivings from people, not just fans, but people who are aligned with the club. People like, say, Shelley Ware, for example, a good friend of mine, Shelley, and a wonderful person, and they have genuine concerns about this stuff. And I know the tendency is for a lot of hardcore footy people to go, touchy-feely stuff. We're worried too much about that. We've got to get back to the footy. But I don't think one necessarily excludes the other. And I think good modern organisations are able to sort of combine those social justice aims with focusing on the football. That said, again, look, I can see arguments both ways here. Even in purely a football sense. Now, this is a side which is chronically weak defensively. Ross Lyon has to be the perfect candidate from that point of view. Alternately, I'm always really troubled by what happened to Fremantle after 2015. They finished on top of the ladder. They finished 16th the next year with 4 wins. We have never, ever seen a side slide that dramatically from one season to the next.
It was that refusal to play any youth, right?
Yeah, well, see, I was going to bring that up, because when that season became irretrievable, they marched out that we're now rebuilding. Okay, well, that's a fairly quick turnaround from top of the ladder. But then I don't think Ross ever really invested 100% in the rebuild. Kids weren't given enough opportunities. So I think that's an issue for Carlton as well. So I can see arguments either way. I think a strong one in his favour, actually. And it's not necessarily a positive either, but he has, having spent time at Carlton in an assistant's role and having been so experienced in footy, he knows who pulls the strings at that club. He knows what makes it tick. He is equipped to deal with the slings and arrows. So that would arm him appropriately far better than a David Teague or a Brendan Bolton. But does that then again just perpetuate the problem? So if I was making the decision, I'd be looking at all these pros and cons and thinking it is a really difficult decision. But Frank, bottom line, I think they're so messed up at the moment and so fraught. I'd probably be biting the bullet and going for Ross.
Yeah, fair enough. As for Teague in going forward, Jake, I mean, he was Adelaide's forwards coach 2016-17 when they were one of the high scoring sides in the league, and comfortably so. Can you see him making a splash or landing anywhere else?
Yeah, I think he will. Maybe not as a head coach in the near future, but I think he'll get another gig as an assistant somewhere. There's only so many coaches going around, and I think he's still got enough to offer. And as we said, he only had the Carlton job for 2 years, and it was very compromised. So I don't think you can truly mark him down significally based on what's happened in the last 24 months. And yet again, I'll say it 100 times: a coach is only as good as the players at his disposal. And you look at Carlton's list, and the list, as Rohan said, and as I agree, the Carlton's list is probably the 12th, 13th, 14th best list right now. So anyone that expects Carlton to be playing finals or finishing 6th is kidding themselves. You're setting yourselves up for disappointment.
And who would want to go to a club that doesn't have a coach right now and a real sense of direction at the moment? I mean, trying to attract off-season talent is just made all that harder when you have decisions like these made for you.
Yeah, it is. I read, just going back to what I said earlier about Carlton being a shambles the last 20 years.
You're going to go somewhere else with that. Shh.
I saw a stat over the weekend, and I was a little bit surprised by it. And then I kind of thought about it more. I thought, yeah, I guess it's true. Carlton's won the fewest games of any team since 2000. The only teams below are Gold Coast and the Giants, who have played half that time. So,
well, when you think about it, I mean, haven't they had? I think the only 3 wooden spoons in their history, or is it 4? I mean, that
they hadn't had a wooden spoon until they.
Yeah. So that period counts for a lot. I mean, and how ironic that their most successful period, that little window under Brett Racken, where they played in finals 3 years in a row. Mm-hmm. And that to me, in the context of the last 20 years, that is the pivotal moment when at the end of 2012, after not that bad a year compromised by injuries, didn't miss the finals by much. And they said, no, we can do better. Mm-hmm. And really look where they were then and look where they are now.
Really failed to capitalize on that string of number 1 and top draft picks: Murphy, Cruiser, Gibbs, all these guys that came in. How often does a club get 3 consecutive number 1 picks that are all pretty damn good players? There just wasn't enough around them, and this has been Carlton's problem for a long time. Is that there's 3 or 4 top liners, and then a massive drop to the next line of guys.
We haven't really touched on this, and we probably don't have time, but I do think there is a much bigger issue here, or we did touch on it, sorry, but the culture thing. Yeah. I mean, look at the way,
the culture sucks.
Well, people, greats of the club like Stephen Silvani, Craig Bradley, they've had issues with the club. Look at the influence of 2 families, the Pratts and the Mathesons, whether they've been on the board or firing bullets from the shadows, their influence. How does Carlton actually curb that influence, even if it wants to? And even if it does curb the influence, hey, the money comes in very handy and is actually quite necessary for Carlton. They're not a financial behemoth these days, so that they are massive issues, and I don't think they're easily fixed. And I think we've now seen, I have great sympathy for the likes of Kane Little and Mark LaJuda, or less so Mark LaJuda, so but Kane Little, Stephen Trigg, people like that. They have genuinely tried to affect cultural change. But that shooting in the shadows, and it doesn't just come from the big money corporate people, it comes from former Carlton greats, looking at you, Mark McClure. They all destabilise a club. They don't help a club. And it just allows the media to perpetuate the same tired old narratives and keep the vicious circle going.
Yeah, I was about to say it's a perpetual cycle. And the shame of it is, and it's probably almost human nature in a way, is that the longer the cycle just keeps on going, the less patient you're going to be, unfortunately. And we've seen that Teague has been a victim of this. And, well, rightly or wrongly, I guess we will find out.
But you still need patience. That's the key to it. You can't. I understand that because the last 20 years have been horrible. You're scrambling to find something that works, but you still going back to the Hardwick point, the Bomber Thompson point, and also to a lesser extent Buckley as well. Everyone was calling for Buckley's head, and he came within a sheed kick of a premiership. Yeah. So, yes, I understand that you want things to work. But no one's going to come in, not Ross Lyon, not Alistair Clarkson. No one's going to come in and take this list to a top 4 next year. It's just every coach is going to need time.
Yeah. Well, this is why I think we discussed it on Tuesday, is why we thought the wins had changed and potentially there was going to be a bit of a show of faith and patience. But alas, wasn't to be. Gentlemen, any other final thoughts before we wrap things up on this bonus pod?
Oh, look, I'd just add to that last point I made that, all this stuff is really sort of shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic and unless they attend to the bigger stuff. And that takes more than even a review of the football operations. And I don't even know where you start doing that, but it's a huge problem for that whole club.
Jake, thanks for joining me and talking Carlton. Rohan, thanks for listening to us bleed our hearts out a little bit and offering a few points here and there. It's
don't you appreciate the fact I didn't fire any barbs in there?
You know what? I was surprised. I had you as a $1.50 favourite to just get a 1 or 2 in there, but you didn't.
I'm a fan of the game, Matt. It's in my interest that all clubs are successful.
You sure it's not just you don't want to jinx your side ahead of this weekend?
Oh, possibly.
Gents, thanks for joining us on the bonus pod. To everyone at home, if you haven't subscribed to the ESPN Footy Pod, please feel free if you liked what you heard today. We'll speak to you on Tuesday.